Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third of our Halloween special mini podcasts.
Spooktacular.
Extravaganza,
spooky.
Horror-palooza.
Horror-palooza, I like that.
I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan Kutlick.
And on this episode, we're going to talk about our favorite monster movies.
Yeah, monster movies they're a wide swath of the horror genre. And what kind of defines a monster movie is pretty vague. For people to argue Jurassic Park as a monster movie.
I would agree Jurassic Park is a monster movie.
Oh, okay.
I see a monster movie as a movie where people are fighting something that's like unnatural in some way. And for whatever reason, it's difficult to defeat. And likely not defeated by, typical means.
Yeah, that's I guess like if you're doing a broad outline like that includes a lot. Because like you could get your Pacific Rims, your Godzillas, your all kinds of like Japanese movies, The Host.
But I think it is a monster movie. I don't think it's that much different at the end of the day. It's just the stakes change because of the size of the monster.
So for my favorite monster movie, I'm going to go with Frankenstein with the classic great Boris Karloff. Because with Frankenstein, I feel like there's a lot to explore there, and even like the whole franchise for Frankenstein, I find really like fascinating in a weird way. Because like the way he looks is just really iconic, and like Frankenstein before that was never depicted in that way, where he's like always like a corpse, but here he's kind of like a blocky like square thing. And I always liked how he was a bit more emotional than all the other monsters. At least during that era, he was a lot more about like just trying to find his place in the world, and the world hated him for it.
Yeah, I think that's it's cool that it conveys that, considering how different from the novel the movie is. Yeah, that message still carries through. That this is really the story about this kind of poor thing that got brought into the world for no reason.
Yeah, like I like how the movie kind of makes it even poorer. Like he can't talk. Like in the book, he's very eloquent. He's like quoting Paradise Lost about like Lucifer and all these things. And like in the movie, he's just like kind of a big dumb Hulk, and he doesn't know his own strength. And he's trying to like when he's playing with that girl, and then he accidentally kills the girl. I always find that scene really sad because he's just trying to like make a friend.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing too, considering how objectively early in popular filmmaking this is coming out. You've already had a film that's basically telling the audience that they're the monsters.
The classic society's the monsters.
Right, yeah. It's a story about how, here's this really monstrous being who could do a lot of damage, but in reality it's just our fault.
Yeah, and then they burn him down in the windmill and everything. It just incorporates a lot of things I like in movies too, just especially older like silent film. It's not silent, but like that era. Where it's just like, you don't get like the same way sets look like that anymore. It's kind of like that weird German expressionism. Right. Where everything's just kind of like stark looking.
I'm also going to go classic Universal monster here. I had really thought about it. We had both discussed this a little earlier, that kind of Godzilla had made like our short list as a monster film. But I think, as we kind of said in the beginning, like Kaiju kind of pushes into its own genre.
I almost picked Shin Godzilla as a favorite monster movie, but there's not a horror element to it. It's more of a less of a horror element, at least now.
I think initially it was experimenting with an idea that was scary, and now we've become so familiar with the idea that it changes the nature of it, and Kaiju always ends up more like a science fiction film, even if it is scary, even if there's a ton of destruction. And I think you're right to say that Shin Godzilla is probably the closest in recent memory to going back to a horror feel. But even that, it's that framework in our brain that you can't break that is part of how movies are made.
It's scary, but not in like a horror way. It's scary in kind of like, oh, this is like a terrible thing way.
So, as you were saying, with the Universal stuff, I was kind of considered all the originals to try to figure out where I fell on them.
I thought you meant you picked all the original ones.
Oh, no. I picked every single one. I'm going to talk extensively about it. This is going to be a 2-hour podcast. No, I almost didn't pick Frankenstein for the reason you did. That it's very unique.
Well, you're right that there's a big like philosophical, like emotional well to draw upon because like it helps that it's based upon a novel that's like really long, not long, but like it's a pretty complex novel and that is exploring a lot of these kind of new ideas.
Right. I went with the Wolfman.
You seem to go for like the very like pure.
Well, that's what I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think about the purity of idea. I went with the Wolfman because it is this sort of random, scary thing. Like, John Talbot doesn't think he's a monster. He has no reason to believe he's going to become a werewolf. And he does. And everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's 70 minutes of things going wrong. Which, first of all, is great. Because I think we should start making movies that short again. It's in so many ways like kind of the opposite. Yeah. It's the story about a guy who ends up becoming this terrible monster through like no fault of his own, but nothing good comes of it. It's a true horror movie in that sense where like there's no like good guy winning at the end of the Wolfman. It's also just sort of based on general myths about werewolves.
Yeah, there's not like a novel. Like even Dracula is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is like a collection of these like horror stories told throughout like the countryside. But here you have a movie that's purely based on just kind of like conjecture and like rumors and things like that.
Yeah, and there's even earlier versions of the script where like it's not 100% explicit if he actually is turning into a werewolf or if this is just some sort of madness that he's going through. And I think you can kind of see that almost in the movie that we end up with. What I think is super, super interesting, and I didn't even know this, if you watch the movie, they quote a poem. And the poem, I have it written here. I'll read it very eloquently now. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and autumn moon is bright. Fine, right? Little poem. In the Wolfman, there is zero indication that the full moon is turning him into a werewolf. There was so much iconography built into it that the public began to believe that that was the cause of him turning into a werewolf. And in later movies, they change it so that's him becoming a werewolf.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And that's where that comes from. This whole idea of like werewolves coming out when there's a full moon. That's established. It's not even established in the Wolfman. It's like people thought that's what was established in the Wolfman, and that became the thought behind werewolves in like contemporary fiction.
That's really interesting because like a lot of that film does take place at night.
The other thing I think is great about the Wolfman is it was made in the 40s, and that makeup still holds up.
Yeah, it holds up really well.
That's really true across the board on the Universal stuff.
I think it being in black and white really helped.
The other thing that I think is really cool about the Wolfman, and it is big on the genre, is the Wolfman becomes sort of the anchor for like the collective Universal Monsters universe that develops. And it's really the first time anyone does that. And it's if you watch those movies, the Wolfman becomes like the hero. He's like the solid figure in the middle of all this. Not to mention that Lon Chaney Jr. like continually plays him over and over again. And it very much lays the groundwork for how franchises are built now.
That's interesting because what was the first one? Wolfman meets Frankenstein?
Yeah, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
We
go alphabetical order here. Frankenstein probably still the bigger star, but that's only 2 years after the Wolfman. It's pretty tight. It's about what they do now.
Yeah, but like this was pretty unplanned. This was just like, here's two popular characters, let's put them together in a movie.
Right, but let's be honest, it's the same reason the Avengers exists.
Yeah, yeah. That's true, but there's like so much more planning behind it now.
Well, yeah, but that's because it was kind of proven it could be done. Here they're just going like, yeah, let's do it.
They're both available.
Yeah, get Dracula back too. Even though that makes no sense if you think about the timing. But
yeah, who cares? It's interesting you picked that too because this is more about like somebody becoming the monster rather than like a monster existing. Because compared to like the other Universal films, like even like Frankenstein, Dracula is the monster. He's very apparent. He's not turning into Dracula. Or like the Mummy, he's not turning into the Mummy. The Mummy just appears.
Right. It makes him sympathetic in a way that even Frankenstein isn't, because Frankenstein's a different kind of commentary. This is sort of, hey, here's a normal guy. Oh, now he's a monster. What do we do?
Yeah, like the dark secret, like somebody has.
I think your Dark Secret point is really good. As we were saying, there was that version of the script where it was really ambiguous whether there was a Wolfman or not, or this is just sort of this guy running around going nuts killing people. There's definitely a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde in there, more than your sort of folktale werewolves that were really just people that turned into wolves.
Yeah, I didn't think of it like that. There's a much more like, here's somebody trying to suppress the dark thing in them. Even like werewolves now, like that's not so much an aspect of them. It's always like, oh yeah, they're very primal force. And here in a Wolfman is about like a guy kind of lying to himself about what he's becoming until he eventually becomes and he can't deny it anymore.
Yeah, and it's even more so interesting that it's nothing he did. Like if you look at like the Werewolf of London, there's this whole thing where they're like finding like the wolf spade and like weird flowers. And that's really the werewolf movie that precedes this that was popular. And this takes a really harsh turn to this almost like philosophical in its own way and based off of nothing more complicated than just taking a bunch of mythology and trying to turn it into something.
Yeah, how do you feel about Chaney as an actor? Because I know he gets criticized quite a lot for his acting skills.
I think he was fine in that movie. I think that it's a really solid film. And I also think if you let go of our preferences now of how like films are shot and, things look like sets in that movie because they are sets. But if you can get past that, it's a really scary movie. Like, it's violent, it's dark, you don't see things on screen all that much, but, like, what's happening in that movie is, like, horrible.
Yeah, it leaves a lot to the imagination. But now that we're talking about werewolves, can I change my pick to Underworld?
Oh, wow. See, but that's where, now we're, like...
I'm joking, I just like that movie because it's Kate Beckinsale in leather.
Yeah, it's... Well, see, but that's where we can even get into where this starts going, where, like, we were talking about how broad monster movie becomes. Like, there's an example of a monster movie that's totally not a horror movie.
No, it's just, like, werewolves with guns, vampires with guns shooting each other.
I remember reading about that before it came out. It's like, they're like, werewolf and vampire Romeo and Juliet story. I'm like, all right, maybe. Sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. Hey, they made, like, what, 6 or something? How many are there? There's a bunch.
Yeah, there's like 6, and Kate Beckinsale's almost all of them.
Yeah,
somehow
get that money.
But it's weird to see like Frankenstein and Wolfman and like these weird psychological roots like eventually explode into like Pacific Rim and Underworld and like where it's like much more like action based now.
Yeah, I think it's because there's so much focus on how to defeat monsters.
Yeah,
that if you start, if you make the purpose of your script how to defeat the monster instead of the monster. It turns into an action movie because that's exactly what it would be.
We recorded the slasher episode last week, but that also is interesting because I'm thinking of like Jason, Friday the 13th. Like the later films are much more about how to like defeat him rather than him like actually killing you.
And he absolutely transitions into a monster. He ends up in space in the future.
Yeah,
you can't kill him no matter what you do, and that's where that we talked about that where I was saying like I don't like the slashers that kind of start to turn into something else all the time. And as we said then, the Friday the 13th series does a better job than a lot of them.
Yeah, because it's still like very gory in its roots.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
But this is where, where I see Freddy Krueger as more of a monster. Because those movies from the first one are like, how the hell do we beat this guy?
Okay, yeah, I can see that for sure.
Even more so in Dream Warriors, which is almost everyone's favorite. It's not mine, actually. But that movie is entirely based around this idea of, all right, we're taking the fight to Freddy now.
Well, it's interesting, like, you say that because, like, Wolfman is not about defeating the Wolfman, No,
Wolfman is just about misery.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's a pure monster movie, is because you're staying away from that action element. Yes, there are people hunting the Wolfman, but you're closer to the Wolfman than you are to the quote-unquote people, like good guys, the heroes who are trying to kill him.
The Van Helsings.
The Van Helsings of the world. Damned Van Helsing. There's another one, Van Helsing. That turned into an action movie. But I think that's all we really have to say on monster movies for this year.
Remember to tell us what your favorite monster movie is.
Yeah.
Like us on YouTube. You can like us on Facebook, Twitter, Vero, Instagram.
Don't forget Vero.
We're Dissecting Fiction on all your favorite social media websites. Follow us. We'll be releasing tons of content this month. And tell us what you think about our picks or what your favorite picks are.
Or just completely tear apart our arguments.
Yeah.
I'm up for it.
Yeah.
Tell me how wrong we are about how monster movies are structured.
We just need engagements. We need engagements.
Yeah,
for
we just want.
algorithm.
Yeah, just whatever. Look, do you know how these algorithms work? Write whatever. Put a review for like a blender on there.
Yeah, we're fine with that.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. Just watch the video and do that.